Hey everyone, welcome to my dual mod tutorial for Brooks arcade boards. The reason why this tutorial is really cool is that by combining these two different Brooks boards, the Brooks Universal board with the Brooks Retro board, you're able to create an arcade stick that can basically do it all, and do it all with low latency. It's an arcade stick that can play basically any console that has a USB port, then also play older consoles like Sega Saturn, Super Nintendo, PS2, Sega Dreamcast, basically cover almost everything under the sun and have one arcade stick that can do it all. I think there are a few small exceptions. For some reason the Sega Genesis is not compatible with the retro board, but for the most part most consoles are going to be compatible with this thing with the proper setup. And so this is something that I've been working towards for a long time. I've had various solutions where I had two different arcade sticks and all those sorts of things. But at this point I feel like I have found my ideal arcade stick, the one you see in the picture here. And so I'm wanting to control everything with this arcade stick, so I've decided to consolidate everything down into this one arcade board setup here. So it's called a dual mod. You do need a lot of equipment for this mod, a lot of different components and stuff like that. I'm going to make a list of it in the video description. Also, word of warning, I wouldn't say this mod is technically extremely challenging, but it is very challenging as far as there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of care you need to take to make sure you're doing the right things. Otherwise you're going to run into a lot of headache. You should also be checking yourself as you go through, making sure things are working step by step rather than doing the entire thing, plugging it in and hoping it works. So I'm going to walk you through this process. Another word of warning is I have been modding and stuff like that for a very long time, but I've never been one to really care that much about the appearance of my modifications, make sure it looks all nice and clean. It looks fairly decent, but it turns into sort of a chaotic nightmare as you get going, but just as you mentally keep track of what you're doing, it should be fine. So I'll begin by going over the components here. So here I have my arcade stick. Inside is already fitted a Brooks Retro board, so I'm kind of doing this backwards where I'll have to do a tutorial on how to do that. So I mean a Brooks Universal board, so it's already equipped with that. And so here is the input multiplier, for the better term of it. This board you need because it basically will multiply the inputs across the two boards. Absolutely essential, you need this. It comes with these ribbon cables. Then it also comes with this cable you see here, which is the USB multiplier. This isn't necessarily required, but I would recommend it, and it does come with the kit with the two ribbon cables, so that's included. And then there's this you need, that's just a short USB cable, but then this thing here that it's connected to is I'll have a link for all this stuff, but it's basically a double female Ethernet jack, so it has two female inputs for an Ethernet jack. That's connecting the cables together. And then of course you need a Brooks Retro board, right? And so here it is. I really love the way the Brooks boards are set up. I love these different pin layouts and stuff, as we'll get through. So those are the things you need. So step one, let's go through the different steps. So step one, of course, here's the retro board. This is just a closer look at everything. This is the cable that I was talking about with the double female jack there. These are the ribbon cables and the multiplier, like I said, that you do one for the left, one for the right, and then you leave that center. I also noticed, this was just trial and error because I had no idea, there was no really clear instruction, but you want the red line of the ribbon cable to be up at the top. If that makes sense, you can kind of look at this picture as a reference. You don't want to swap it around where one's upside down, right? You need them to be right side up, so towards the top is those red lines, right? And you can kind of reference this picture if you need to double check, because this is correct. Then of course here's my arcade stick. First thing we need to do, we need to open it up. This is my arcade stick pre-modification. Like I said, my mods are very functional but not necessarily the prettiest thing. So this is the Brooks Universal board, which I absolutely love, definitely recommend it. This thing connects to basically all USB consoles that I am aware of. It connects to them all, so highly recommended. It's about $80 or so. This is a more expensive setup, but I do have to say, I know that the Mayflash sticks offer some sort of like functionality across lots of different things as well. don't do the Mayflash sticks. They are laggy and pretty low quality. Go with the Brooks setup. I mean, if you're looking for a quality setup, those Mayflash sticks drive me crazy. I'm not a fan of those, but I do know a lot of people have them. And so, yeah, this is just kind of the standard setup. Don't mind the splicing and hot glue. Closer look at the board. So the first thing you need to do is just take your retro board out, right? So now we've got just sort of the wires and everything. You have to unscrew them here, these little terminals they screw into. Now this is the most tedious aspect of the tutorial, the most time consuming. What you need to do, I'm surprised I don't have, oh there it is, there's a picture of it. So you also need one of these. I didn't have it in the beginning, but I'll put a link in the video description and all that. But you need one of these. It's like a jump harness or something like that. I'm not sure what necessarily the name of it is, but it's a 20-pin harness. So this is the thing that plugs into this middle section here. So you plug into this middle section here, and then it squids out all the inputs to your arcade stick buttons. You see the little quick connects here. See the arcade stick button. The thing about it for me is that my arcade stick, these quick connects are sort of like really tightly connected on there, to the point where I feel like they're not quick disconnects at all. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up splicing the cables rather than pulling off the quick disconnects. But you can just use the squid to pull off the quick disconnect, and then all these black ones would go to the negative inputs, the negative prongs on your buttons. You can see the buttons here. It doesn't matter which one it is, it's just one needs to be negative, one needs to be positive. So they would all connect to these little prongs here. So you get this all connected. I'll put out the diagram. This is also another part where each wire is an input, and so there's just a diagram that you're going to need to follow and make sure you identify which wire is which input. What I did here is I got some masking tape and like labeled the wires. You could probably do a better job at it than I did, because they started to stick together, as you can see. But it worked well enough. You can maybe put like a piece of paper on the back of them, or have some kind of better way to label them, or write them down a list or something like that. But anyway, basically you need to identify what each wire is. The black ones are the ground, that's easy. What each wire does, what each wire, like one of these will be up, one of these will be down. You can see what I'm saying. So once you go through, what you want to do is you want to splice the wires together if you're going to do splicing. And I've had a lot of people asking about, do you have to solder everything together to splice wires and stuff? And I wanted to show this while I had this opportunity here. I'll probably show this in future tutorials as well. But while soldering stuff together is definitely like the most reliable, strong way, right, to create electrical connections, I think with arcade stick wiring and stuff, it's really not all that necessary. I pretty much never do it anymore. For one, because sometimes I want to like reverse the connections and undo it, so it's more useful not to solder them. And also the voltages are so low, and you can really wrap these wires really tightly together enough to create a really solid connection. So what I do here is I sort of braid them together, and then I make this tiny little ball, and then I wrap them with electrical tape. I'll kind of go ahead and demonstrate that here. I decided to maybe demonstrate it for you in real time. So here we go. We got our two wires. Hold these to the camera, right? With two wires. This is just demonstration. So once you get the wires stripped like this, I'll show you what you want to do. Kind of overlap them like this. Twirl them together. Really tight. Twirl together. Now you take that, sort of twirl it around itself. Create this little ball, and then you lay them out. Straighten it. There you go. And then you wrap that with electric tape, masking tape, hot glue, whatever you want to do. something you need to insulate it in some way though. In this mod I use masking tape because that's what I had on hand. It's really easy to insulate these because they carry barely any charge or anything like that. But yeah, I went with masking tape just for convenience, but you can use hot glue or electric tape. You'll see different times I use different ones. So once you get that done, you're going to need to do that for all the inputs, right? And so that's going to be the most time-consuming process. This took me about 40 minutes to do because I spliced all the wires. But if you don't want to splice all the wires, you can just pull these quick disconnects off here and then put on the ones on the harness. Depending on your arcade stick, sometimes these will connect on there nicely. With mine though, I'm using this Hori SX SA. They're on there so hard that it was actually easier just to splice the wires. So this is something I want to show with my arcade stick in particular, but this could also apply to many people's arcade stick, which is accessing the start. Well, the start button's here, but the select and home button are up on this panel here, as you can see. Here's home, select, they're on the panel here. So you need to access those buttons, trust me, which can be a pain in the butt. With what you can do with my arcade stick, and this will probably carry over to a lot of different arcade sticks, this method anyways, there's this panel here, so you unscrew the little screws from the panel, and you pull it off here, and then you look to see how these wires correspond to what the inputs are. So on mine, the furthest wire is ground, then select, PS, that's home. So ground, select, home. So I took a picture of it, wrote that down, and so when I go back and look at the wiring here, I really have a good picture of it, but that's what I did, was you identify which wires go to what, and then write it down. There's the jump harness again. So make sure to get all of those wired up correctly, and this is kind of what it looked like at the end there. Pure chaos. They get them all spliced up. You can see the cable here. So now what we need to do is we need to install that Ethernet port thing here, all the way back here, this. So we need to install this in the arcade stick. Now a lot of people have different ways of doing this, and I learned from past that a lot of people will like install it up in here and have it just be right on the outside of the case. If you're really good with working with plastics and cutting them and making things look nice, sure, go ahead and do that because that will be convenient. But for me, as I learned with my last arcade stick, I'm not good at that, and so what I thought would be better is to actually just hide the port inside the arcade stick. As you can see here, it is hidden, right? The port isn't sticking out on the outside. It's hidden inside this compartment here. Much nicer. So that's what I did, was I looked and found a wall in that compartment I could basically cut into and install it. And so when it comes to cutting plastics, I've done this a lot of different ways over the years. Early on, I used to actually, before I kind of figured out what I was doing, I used to heat razor blades with a torch and then cut into them with a hot razor blade, which does work kind of well, but it's kind of a time-consuming process. And so one day, when I was modding a Gamecube, I decided, screw that shit. I'm just gonna burn it with an old soldering iron. So that's what I do. Most people would probably have some kind of drill and drill a hole and stuff like that. I've never been really good with working with drills as far as cutting them really precisely. What you're making kind of a squarish hole anyway, not necessarily a perfect little circle, right? I know you could do this however you want to do it as far as making this hole, but if you're a lazy boy and just want to get it done real fast, just shove a soldering iron into it. That'll do the trick. If you're using the soldering iron method, obviously this is not like the safest thing to do for a lot of reasons. For when you're burning plastic, don't inhale those fumes, that'll make you sick. Also, it's like super hot or whatever. But if you do it outside, because if you do it inside, you're going to set off your fire alarms and stuff. So go ahead, go outside and get your soldering iron all heated up, and what I did is I just went in there and you can just like draw the hole with a soldering iron basically. Like I said, I'm not really too worried about aesthetics personally because this is going to be hidden inside the compartment anyway. So you got the hole made. Then go ahead and install the jack here. And so then I'm going to secure it. Again, these are sort of like homebrewish styles of method of modding cases. I'm sure many of you have much more elegant ways to install this little jack thing, but this is just the fast, easy, cheap way to do it. Just hot glue it in there once you get in. If you ever need to remove it, rubbing alcohol will kind of make it soft. You can pull it back out. Do that. So this is what it looks like when I get it all installed. It looks pretty insane, but like I said, it doesn't really matter to me because this is going to be hidden inside the compartment casing. So the next step is to get the two boards in there, right? So on the left here, here's the retro board, and you just connect the boards to these 20-pin jump harnesses here. Then do the same here. Make sure those red lines are on the tops, right? Making sure you're lining those up. And then you can see the center jump connector here, and that's going out to all your different inputs and stuff like that. And so now they're sharing inputs between the boards, which is really cool. And so the last option that you can do, it is optional, but I like to do it, is installing the USB bridger here. So this wire here just connects on this part of your board, and it bridges the USB connections between the retro board and the universal board, as you can see here. So here it goes, traveling across, connecting the two. So now basically this can chain into this one's USB cord, which is coming out through here and then connecting out to the external port here. As you'll notice, I have removed my old USB cord coming out here. You don't have to do that. You could actually have two USB cords, just have your old one and then have this one, and then you don't need to bridge them. The reason why I like to is just for like a utilitarian, I don't really like the part of how the cord's always hanging out and stuff like that. Where if you remove it and you bridge the ports, then you have like a removable USB cord, which I think is really nice. So yeah, like I said, it looks like pure chaos sort of when you open it up and look inside. I don't really worry too much about securing the boards or anything like that. I'll sometimes put like a thin little towel over the top of everything to kind of keep everything nice and not hitting the bottom of the case, which can happen sometimes. But yeah, get everything nice and secured in there however you want to. Put it back together. And this is what it looks like. Look, when you just close that compartment, looks totally normal, right? So I think that's a really good way to install it. That way it's not looking like hell. When you open it up inside though, there's the little Ethernet jack, right? And so the way this works is with the universal board, you're going to want to order or make, you can actually make these cables if you want, a USB to RJ45 cable like this. These come, links and all that kind of stuff. You have one of those. And this is how the Brooks Retro board connects to all these different old consoles and stuff like that. It'll basically have cables for a PS1, the Saturn, Dreamcast. Those are the ones I think you can buy, but you also can actually make your own cables for stuff like the Super Nintendo and all these other consoles. I'll do a video on making these cables. I made a PS2 one. So anyway, so then you get that. And you plug the USB, not the USB, the Ethernet port into there. And then plug it into your computer. And when it reads the input, this is just saying what the input is. It'll read it as PS3 wired gamepad. If it says PS3 wired gamepad, that is reading the Brooks Retro board. So the Brooks Retro board can connect to PS3s and can connect to PC through a PS3 style input, which is really compatible. So for the most part, I just use the Retro board on my computer now, right? Very low latency, just like the Universal board. However, if you want to access your Universal board through this wire without having to have the separate wire, all you need to do is you need to hold start and select. Oh, just make sure, of course, when you plug it in, Just make sure all your inputs work, right? So that's what I did. You can sometimes with Windows 10, if you hit the home button, it'll like open up weird menus and stuff like that. But yeah, just make sure all your inputs work. And then if you want to access your universal board rather than your retro board, which you'll want to do like if you're playing on a PS4 or an Xbox or a Switch or something like that, or if you want Xbox One inputs on your computer, what you do is you hold start and select as before you plug in the USB cable to your computer or whatever you're plugging into. You need to hold start select as you plug it in, because that activates a bypass on the retro board so that your universal board will be read. And the easy way to tell if that works is just hold start and select, plug it into your computer. If your computer reads it as Xbox One, that means it is now using the universal board. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because if you want to play PS4, you can either have the two USB cables coming out. Let me show you what that would sort of look like. Go back to one of my earlier pictures here. Okay, so here's my original cable, right? So what it would look like if you went with the two USB cables is you just leave this plugged in here. You wouldn't jump the inputs with that black cable. Instead, you just leave that plugged in here. Then your Brooks universal board or your Brooks retro board would be here, and it would be plugged in. It'd still go through the 45 Ethernet cable and all that. But you'd have you'd have the port here, and then you'd have this one, just the cable like usual. And if you did it that way, then you could just plug it in directly as you used to. You didn't have to do this bypass method. But for me, I like doing the bypass because now I don't have to have a cable in there. It can just be empty, and then when I want to use it, I can just plug it into my Fight Stick, which I think is actually more convenient. So I did check it to make sure, okay, does this actually work? And yes, it does work. I was able to, get around in the menus and everything. Just make sure you're holding start and select as you plug it in. You kind of have to, on mine, because my start and select are kind of a ways apart from each other, I have to sort of like claw it with my hand as I plug it in. It's not that bad once you kind of get the hang of it. And then, of course, let's see if it worked on the PS2. If you, get your PS2 cable, which isn't the same one as the USB, right? You need to have the separate Ethernet to PS2 cable. Plug that into your PS2, and it just works. You don't need to do the bypass, right? And so that's the tutorial. That's how you can get dual modded to basically control everything with one arcade stick. Basically, almost any console. I know the Sega Genesis is an exception, but outside the Sega Genesis, I think basically everything else, these bad boys will connect to Switch, PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PC. The Universal board's got you covered. I think the Wii U as well. Universal got you covered. And then for the retro stuff, like your PS2, PS1, Sega Saturn, SNES, Sega Dreamcast, and probably some more. I think Neo Geo as well. They have a whole list on their website, but basically everything except the Sega Genesis, I believe, you can use this retro board. So it's just an all-in-one amazing solution. There's a lot of different parts. It is kind of a bit of a time-consuming process, especially if you're not used to console modding. But I think following this guide, it'll definitely help you out. If you have questions, let me know. The big part is I'll have this huge price list. The end price tag for all this is quite a bit expensive, I'm not going to lie. It's probably going to be about $150 to $200 to get all the equipment to make it happen. But at the same time, I mean, you never need to really upgrade your arcade stick or buy another arcade stick again, and if you don't want to, if you found the perfect solution. And also, I'm really hoping that when the PS5 comes out, the Universal board will get firmware updates, because it can get firmware updates to support the PS5. I really hope Brooks do that instead of, making you buy another board, which would be pretty awful, I think. I have faith that they will, though, because they added Switch functionality and stuff to it as well. So, thanks everyone for tuning in. I guess I'll end off by thanking my patron. So thank you to Dingo, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Brian Shiver, Dunpeel 2064, EC 2151, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Gus, Kiwi, Jake Ryan, Joe Angelo, John, Game Boy Guru, Kay, Quentin, Malaise, Mark Sloan, Maz, Mayhair Calendrian, Nathaniel Davis, N Electron, Neon Daggers, Okla Kugel, Parlar, Rhizosis, Sir Thumbs, Sant Marab, Sugumo, Turapon, Young Money Sui, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.